Good morning, uh, good day, good afternoon, depends where you are. This is a very short space. I'm not going to be very long, but it is happening because we have had a discussion with Shai Muratov, you know the guy. We're probably gonna invite his ass over at Timor Criminal if he wants. But right now, it's being a funny discussion, and honestly, it's very stimulating for a couple of things because we are looking at the current state of Western, at least European, because Western is it's a large blanket statement, but the European military-industrial complex state, and this is going to go through two main aspects based on rather anecdotal evidence, but they mean a lot. First of all, I think that everybody has seen that Germany is proposing to send Caracal vehicles to 404 at a rather steep price. There is talk about almost 3 million euros or something like that for 5 vehicles. As you've seen, also the vehicles are rather Spartan. They're supposed to be high mobility, high speed, low drag, to quote a joke. And they look like German Mercedes G wagon from the front. But when we discussed with Shai, we agreed that the mass is way too big. We are speaking about 4.5 tons, and it's very possible that the chassis that's being used is actually coming from a other non-German company called Zetor. You should check the company; they make some nice products, like a very nice wrap, and they have slapped a parts bin in order for them to be more appealing. The vehicle itself is very poorly protected. You can supposedly add or not add doors, but the presentation on the ad makes it a airdroppable vehicle, not a lot of all-around protection, probably so-called mine protected from beneath, but due to the fact that you don't have doors, that makes it a very dicey proposal for whoever is there. And also, very interestingly, the Germans are, as I said, making these envoy cost a lot. And the question that I already analyzed was like, how the hell such a vehicle with about 400 to 700 kilograms of transportation mass can be sold at this price and at such a low count unit, because at the same time the Russians are having a buggy style golf cart, call it what you want, ATV from a Chinese company. Once again, I'm not comparing both vehicles on every aspect, because of course one is a full-fledged truck in my opinion, and the other one is a ATV comparable to Polaris vehicles. However, the ATV that the Russians bought from China has almost the same capacity of transport, and also can carry almost the same number of people. Of course, it's probably not mine protected, but as I said, given that you don't have a overall all-around protection for you, it doesn't matter if you are protected from underneath or not. But also the numbers both, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they have already ordered over 500 to be transported for the end of December 2023. Which is a huge purchase for Russia when it comes to that. And I said that those are baby steps in terms of how Russia should start dealing with this war in terms of material. And in total, until April 2024, about 1,600 of these vehicles should be imported. The main difference is that when you do the comparison, you are seeing that for the price of those 5, alleged price, once again, we don't know how much the vehicles are really going to cost on the German side, but it's implied or stated that they cost about 2.7 million euros or around 3 million, depends who you listen. For that price, the Russians apparently have bought, because we also have the price for the Russian vehicles at around 16,000 US dollars. The Russians have bought 168 vehicles for the price of 5 German caracals. The sheer difference in volume tells us a lot about what we are seeing. First of all, I have a bad feeling for the Desert Cross on the Russian side, not because it's a bad vehicle, quite the contrary, but as I said previously on the space, these should have happened years ago. And for a long while, the Russians themselves were testing buggies. There were a couple of very cringy designs, very nice designs as well. We've had, for those who remember Colonel Lebed, having riding a bike, riding buggies made by gas at some point and so on. But it never came to something until war literally showed that they needed ATVs, but they could not start, purchasing Polaris and all this stuff, given that the prices, first of all, were abnormally high, but also there is this sanction regime which makes it very complicated to buy high volumes of these vehicles overall. You can always buy it by Belarus or another country, but then you're gonna add another premium layer. So what the Russians did, they did something they have been doing actually for a lot of time, and that happened already in 2020 when a Chinese company, Heval, won a Russian Ministry of Defense tender for armored and unarmored protocol cars, basically huge Hilux, Toyota Hilux style SUVs. It was the Heval H9, of which, interestingly, none has popped out in the Ukrainian war zone. This probably because of the role that the vehicle is recovering. But other Chinese vehicles, notably pickups, have popped out in Ukraine. So what is this about? This is through this first example, but also a second example I want to give you, is to show why the West has problems with supplying Ukraine on time and at decent prices. We're going to start with this. The caracal for Rheinmetall is extremely complicated because Rheinmetall is in a bad situation financially. They're going to go out of that financial situation. It's not an issue, and I'm going to explain you why with the following argument. Rheinmetall, because of a policy of both investment and acquisition, are in the red financially, mostly because they have acquired a couple of extra productivity tools. They have started negotiation with a Spanish ammunition producer. It's called Expal. And initially, the weapons manufacturer in question was evaluated by the state, the Spanish state, although the manufacturer was supposed to be semi-private, at between 2 and 500 million euros. So all assets and the net worth in the market. Then after negotiations, the Spanish state put the cap at 417 million, more or less. But there was a large debt, and there were multiple locations of the said company to actually reorganize. The Spanish state wanted to reduce the locations from 6 to 4, even 3, in order to make also the jobs within the company sustainable. Because one of the biggest problems for Expal is that there were simply too many people around and not enough profit to make the company go on. Surprisingly, the Germans actually, and you can verify the numbers, actually overestimated the company when they started the complete overtake of the company at about 1.2 billion. Why? Mostly because the war in Ukraine was there. Initially, the overvaluation was around 800 million, but in between two steps of acquisition, in February 2020 happened, and the Germans were like, okay, we will need ammunition, which was a very visionary move, by the way. I'm absolutely not contesting that. Rheinmetall bosses were smart. The problem, though, is that the reevaluation from the 800 million went to 1.2 to 1.4 billion euros. This also meant that the provisions for debt and growth, so basically reorganization and also reopening of certain locations, went up to 2.1 billion euros. So this is your provision that you need to have engaged so that the sale is going to be acted. So basically, Rheinmetall put itself in the red for 2.1 billion to acquire this company. Of course, this was just the minus they took for Expal. They had money from other side, but they also had debts on the other side. And most problematically, they also started to build another ammunition factory to cover for tank rounds, artillery rounds, and anti-aircraft artillery at some point when they had the situation with Swiss the Swiss over the RAG non-re-export policy. Basically, the Swiss didn't want that the 35 millimeters that the RAG was making went to Ukraine, given that Switzerland is a neutral country. So what happened is that meanwhile, Rheinmetall has been going in the red for multiple expenses, and these expenses are up to 3.8 billion euros. And that's why I explained to you that the cost right now that has been disbursed from the European Peace Fund, about 2.4 billion euros in total, despite what was said that actually it's a 2 billion fund and only half of it has been disbursed. In reality, it's a lot more. It comes with the caveat that companies that, like Rheinmetall, are already in the red before they even start seeing the money. As I told you, they acquired Expal. They have going on for a specific factory in Germany. They are also doubling and ramping up the production in South Africa because despite whatever was said, so that the South Africans were full, and they are actually, they have a long-term contract with multiple customers. Now the Germans want also to pick up from the formerly Denel system ammunition, and we're speaking about 20 to 50,000 rounds, something that I said will not going to happen simply because that would mean that the customers that the South Africans are serving right now will not see their ammunition in the long term. So we're speaking at least a 1 to 1.5 year delay. However, what is going on via Rheinmetall is that the European customers of Denel systems are going to actually cede some of their production in order for the Germans or the European Peace Fund to be able to deliver more ammunition. Now, when you see this, you perfectly understand why Rheinmetall is pricing the shit the way it's pricing. It needs to make a lot of money, and it's trying to grift it whenever it can. And that's also why the French, as I told you yesterday, are now asking the Ukrainians to just pass orders and not ask for ready stock, because that's the problem. When you ask for ready stock for the French, it needs to be amortized how it was bought. So basically, let's say that the French amortize their artillery rounds for 800 euros. Well, that's going to count for 800 euros of help towards Ukraine. You're going to add for the transportation, it's going to maybe jump at 1,000. But the French don't want that. The French want that the money they put in the pot, as I said to you yesterday, is dispersed at current prices. Because that means that it's not the French military who's going to spend money for its own rounds, but it's the other partner states that are going to disperse rounds for armament that Ukraine is going to have, and also for armament and ammunition that the French are going to use to backfill their own inventory, which means that the price is going to be always lower than if the French had to pay fully for their own resupply. All this is very logical, very simple, and you understand that. However, we got a second step. The Ukrainians, a lot of NAFOids. Okay, the guy I'm going to quote here is not NAFOid, it's Jeff, but a lot of NAFOids are having the same logic, and they are giving, and that's the second part. Why don't we have enough capability in Europe to do this? If you remember, I made a post about a NAMO study. NAMO is a Norwegian ammunition company, who said that the actual top capacity in Europe is about maximum 500,000 rounds a year. This is true. Could be up to 700,000 if they really press, so new investment and so on. But it's also a bit untrue, as I said, because the Germans can always take out of the 150,000 rounds per year that the NEL system does in South Africa, grab 2/3 of it, and that makes it about 800,000. It's still not enough if you have to resupply and refill. If you just have to resupply Ukraine, it could be interesting. But that's, once again, it's something different. However, the reason why the Europeans, so quote unquote, cannot manufacture more is because supposedly France and other countries didn't want to go abroad to be able to saturate the Ukrainian needs with ammunition. Basically, what the logic is here is that France, Germany, the EU, basically, with their fund, give to a guy the possibility to purchase rounds, Turkey, Japan, South Africa, but this I already explained, South America, Pakistan, whenever you want. This is actually a fake reason. I'm going to tell you why it's a fake reason, and it's going to have a reversal of a backblast, if you want, a recoil. Because once you go on the open market, you do not control your supply. The supply, if Pakistan says to you, okay, I'm going to produce for you rounds instead of 4,000, I'm going to produce them for 2 or 3,000, it's fine. But Pakistan does not control its raw materials. They have the free capacity, if you want, to make more at the same time that you're producing. But that's the capacity if the raw materials are there. Once you go abroad, go to Turkey, go to South Korea, you go to Pakistan, you add the burden of purchase, you spread it out. The market supply for raw materials is completely inelastic. So instead of having one group buying everything and producing them at their own cadence and so controlling also the supply price, you have multiple guys gunning for the same cake. So basically, you're going to say, okay, we do 1 million in Europe and then another 1 million abroad. But that means that at the same time, given that your cake is the same, the prices for the raw supplies are going to get up because everybody's trying to buy them up in order to have an edge towards the other production. This happened literally with Bulgaria, which had a deal with the US, then had a deal with Ukraine, and then also wanted to take a bit of the cake from the European Peace Fund. And this is the funny part. Everybody ignores that the market for these materials is extremely inelastic. You can ask for more, but that would mean that the suppliers, which are mostly outside of Europe, are not controllable. And this is where the Russians and the Chinese and other people just chime in. And what do? Russia, for the moment, is at 80% of its supply capacity. So basically, they don't really need to buy abroad. We're saying raw materials. I'm not saying rounds. But what did Russia just do? If you have to believe Western intelligence, they went to Korea, and apparently North Korea, and asked the North Koreans to start producing, so giving them ready shells, but also start producing for them. The question is now, is this deal, Russia giving money to North Koreans and North Koreans buying via China raw material for filling, for ammunition and so on, which would mean that a lot more supplies are going out of the market. And then you can imagine if you have on top of whoever is trying to produce these rounds, you add also China that is producing, buying for North Korea, which is sending to Russia, and also is paying in the same market. You get an inflation of prices. So actually, for once, the Europeans were extremely smart. Okay, didn't pan out as well as they wanted, but they were extremely smart. Because first of all, they cut out all the middlemen that would add an extra layer of cost. And the decision was either you have this moment when you go abroad, you go to Turkey, and you put money on the table, but this money is only going to buy you an extra oomph for a short time, because that would mean that the market is going to be saturated with demand. And so the price is going to go up at the even second order. This means that instead of having all the money spent in Europe and having the rounds with certain delay, you're going to have initially enough to meet the first tranche of your demand. But on the second one, because everybody's trying to buy the raw materials, the price is going to go up. So not everybody's going to be able to actually accede to your second round. So this would have been a temporary respite for Ukraine. But overall, it would have gotten worse, deeper and deeper. And Europe, instead of actually having its productivity pumped up by reinvesting in its own market, would have started with buying abroad, not having capability at home because the money is limited. It's not like they have washing cash so they can sustain their productivity and buy abroad. It's not America. Actually, the European Peace Fund cannot put $800 to $900 billion because it's simply not the budget that the European defense has right now. We have to admit that. Like the top five barely go to 300 billion, and all the rest is useless. So, on top of it, America is phagocyting completely the system. Like you have Europeans putting money together to buy artillery rounds and shit, and then you have the Americans going behind this European Peace Fund and selling their shit to countries like Romania, countries like Macedonia, and so on. All this stuff, and I know that people are going to be like, yeah, but all this stuff costs money. And it's true there are loans, but you need to pay them back. So the budgets from these different militaries start to be overloaded from the replacement procurement, but on top of it, they need to keep expending money to keep up with the artillery ammunition budget for Ukraine. And this is the exact problem here. The design behind the European Peace Fund, first of all, absolutely ignored the state of the European MiG. When you see Rheinmetall, it's awful and obvious. But also, you got dying elephants within the European MiG, like the French MiG. I said it yesterday. Those guys, they have only 3 major projects right now, and all the rest is boutique stuff. Granted, very good boutique stuff. I mean, I'm all towards the Griffon and Jaguar vehicles. But behind that, what? No new tanks for a while. The tank project is maybe going to pan out in 2030. But there, again, are going to be only 2 nations involved in that project, despite everything that was said. France and Germany. What's the capability for that? If we are going back to 20, 25 million euros per tank, without the development costs, of course, where are we? Those guys are going to have to disburse 10 billion in order to have a decent tank force for peace purposes. let alone starting to have each side 500 tanks, which again would be decent, but just not good enough for the ongoing type of hostilities we see in Ukraine. So overall, a lot of people are giving this very good advice and what should have been done and so on. The problem is that here we have the crude reality of one block not controlling its own supply, one block having also lost a lot of its manufacturing, and the reasons are numerous. First of all, we got the end of the Cold War. A lot of this manufacturing base was redundant, and as I said, the Russians did it, Ukraine did it, a lot of Eastern countries did it, and so it happens also for Western Europe. On top of it, because this industry in Europe is, and everywhere actually, is export oriented, that's the market. The Europeans had a very good niche with petromonarchies, but how many more tanks are you going to sell to these guys? It's not like they are 100 billion rich Saudi sheikhs to pay for your toys. And on top of it, you're not alone on that market. You got the Americans who are the overarching power in this. Second of all, generally the lack of conflict means that, as I said, the cost of a military, the cost of a military-industrial complex is just sunk cost. You can make the best thing ever, but you need to justify its production by its use. If you are not using it, and I mean in anger, not for parades, not for maneuvers and so on, if you are not using it, first of all, you don't understand how good it is. And we saw that the Leopard was sold like an excellent system, but it burns just the same as the lowly T-72. And it has just the same issues because it's a tank. Conceptually, it's the same thing. You're going to have some better aspects or worse aspects, but it's the same thing. It's a huge fucking tractor on caterpillars with a huge fucking engine going fast, having a moderate pressure on the ground when it's running, but then it doesn't need to stop. So it needs to be protected frontally mostly. It needs to have a gun stabilization. You need to have a type of internal ergonomic design that would allow both an optimum of protection for the crew, but also functionality of the vehicle. All this shit, you know, it's not going to be much different from a tank to the other, generally. Despite everything that we speak about the Abrams, you will have to have dangerous phases where the tank is not secluded, the tank crew is not secluded from ammunition, and so on and so on and so on. But generally, what I'm saying is that European MiG fell victim, and this is something that the French know since way before the end of the Cold War, to the fact that they are under the banner of NATO. And NATO is the head honcho, America, and all the rest needs to fight for its own market. That's what France did beautifully by disengaging at a huge cost for France. Its military industry was producing at some point everything they needed. In what quantity, in what quality, that's something different. But then, Cold War ended, France went back to the NATO fold, and that started to, basically, we had the Rafale that was a failure story for so long until they broke out their first sale, and then it went more or less okayish. But generally, as you see, the moment when the security situation worsens, the Western MiG, especially the European one, is going to start coalescing and contracting instead of expanding. And why do I say contracting? Because, as I said, in this case, Rheinmetall and the factories in Bulgaria, Slovakia, and so on are going to grow for sure because there's a need for it. But the problem is that it's a temporary blow up until the war stops. One of the things that a lot of Central European countries have done that's extremely wrong is that they gave up homegrown systems and internal stock because, of course, those were compatible with what Ukrainians were seeking initially. But to replace them now, most of them have to rely on abroad. So that's why I'm saying, first of all, you get this growth because you need supplies. But then once it's done, you understand that you just gave up whatever production capability you had because you were buying from abroad. And from multiple producers, you're going to have one main winner right here. And to be honest, it was logical from the beginning. It's going to be the United States. If the practice of replacing the lost or the sent to Ukraine tanks keeps on going with stock Abrams refurbished and sent to Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Poland's already done, Slovakia, and so on. Although the Slovaks have chosen for a different solution. So this is the main problem. One cake, few party goers. If you want to grow fast, the cake is not going to become bigger. And the money allocated to pick from that cake comes only from one side. Pakistan is not going to start investing money on its own to sell to Ukraine because they don't have a view on the war. Pakistan is not an engine behind the war. I'm choosing Pakistan not because I want to aim at anyone, quite the contrary. I'm just saying that it was a potential supplier. Turkey is just the same. Turkey is not steering this war. Turkey is okay with whatever is going on because it has made its dough with it. Grain on one side, weapons on one side, and gas, oil, and a bit more influence and money on the other side from Russia. For Turkey, it's okay, so they don't give a fuck what's going on. But once again, they are not the driving force. Turkey is not going to start producing more artillery rounds and send them to Ukraine to sustain the war in a way or another because it has interest in Russia and the status quo as it stands. Is Russia going to win and lock the Ukraine out of the Black Sea? Doesn't matter. For Turkey, Russia is a huge partner, especially now with the things that are going on. And also especially with the Gaza and Israeli situation. Turkey is a Muslim country. They understand perfectly what's going on. They see the pattern of ethnic cleansing happening. But once again, they cannot control it. They cannot say to the US, you stop Israel or we stop the Bosphorus Passage or we let more Russian Navy ships go through to reinforce the Black Sea Fleet. Once again, what I said, most of the external factors, South Korea and so on, they don't have a view on what's going on and who is pushing for the war to continue. The ones doing that, US, Europe, a couple of other weirdo countries. This is the engine behind this war on top of Ukraine, of course. So these guys also control the disbursement. America, as I said, has no problem amortizing this shit out, growing its own production, spending everything inside. And that's the great advantage. It's a single country. Federal system, whatever, but they can literally dump their own money on their own. That's the great advantage. That's maybe one of the greatest luck that Ukraine has, that it has a big control like America. But in a multi-system, a not even confederal system like the EU, of course you're going to have huge problems of organizing, articulating, synchronizing, and also just getting on the same page on everything. Price, rate, supply lines, and so on. And on top of it, it's not like it's a state-owned structure. No, those are all private structures with state links and so on. but there are private structures. So they have shareholders. They need their accounting to be clean, and also there is a political problem with them. If tomorrow we learn that the CEO of Rheinmetall has taken bribes, you got, unfortunately, a scandal. And the company risks to get paralyzed. Its price on the market is going to dump and bump, and then you're going to have a problem when Rheinmetall is going to be on the red for a couple of operations, which means, because it's a publicly traded company, you're going to have a huge problem. And I heard some guys say, like, I don't understand how the fucking share price of Rheinmetall doesn't drop when you see how shit the Leopard and this and this are. It's very simple, because money is still going to that place, war is still ongoing, and profit is there to be made. Now, the difference is that I agree with what I said. The price is not dropping because the market on that aspect is not emotive like most people who are following this war, where they see like 10 Russian tanks blown. Oh my God, tanks are a war. Oh my God. No, it doesn't work like that. To people like me, it's if I had to be on...
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
The Rheinmetall part, I would say, oh great, 10 new tanks I need to build. It's sad to say it like that, because it's a temporary loss of force. But for the company as it stands, it's a great moment, because you need to replace them. So you're awaiting an order to replace them. And this situation is exactly why I wanted to make this space, to explain people that the problem with Europe is that they are into an inelastic market, into a very specific and peculiar market, and they cannot make up shit out of thin air. And on top of it, because they buy on the open market, they are also sensitive to other parties chiming in and fucking up the prices by buying premium. I said the best thing that Russia could ever do is go on the open market, let's say go to Argentina, let's say go to Africa, and raise up the raw material prices by overbuying shit that nobody is buying. And that supposedly means that the 2 billion that the Europeans have slated for your artillery rounds, instead of giving you the material to build 1 million rounds, only give you like 700,000. But 300,000 rounds short of that account is huge, because we're not speaking about like an Apple product or a car or whatever. We're speaking about rounds that need to defend positions, lines, and to at least, if not win the war, make it a stalemate. And this is exactly where I wanted to go with this space, to explain to you guys that the most important part in this war is something that we don't see. And thank God, Russia has China on its side. Honestly, simple. Because the purchase power, the entry of the Chinese companies is such that if it's true that the North Koreans now, on top of sending shit to Russia ready-made, are also producing stuff that the Russians are paying, that China is buying, shipping back to North Korea, which is paying China in return, then god damn it, that's the smartest fucking move I've ever seen. And in a sense, it's such a double blow. It deprives the market out of serious raw materials. It circulates money from the DPRK, who needs that shit, to the Chinese, who don't really need it, let's be honest. It insulates the relationship between the purchaser, in this case China, the supplier, some country, whenever it is, because the Americans cannot start saying to the Chinese, you cannot buy on the open market. We are speaking about something completely different there. We are speaking about war between China and the US, or at least war sounds. And that's what I'm saying. It's like such a fucking amazing turn of events right now that I cannot even believe. I cannot even believe that Europeans were so fucking delusional not to see this coming. Of course, they did because they didn't accept to buy abroad. But again, due to the fact they still need to buy abroad on their own, it just makes it just a little bit better. And it's great. It's great. It's one more step towards this invisible victory that is going to happen. How big it's going to be, I don't know. Honestly, I would like it to be not that big. If maximalist Russian positions are to be earned, we are going towards a real Cold War in Europe. And the whole point here was that the Europeans understand that Uncle Sugar cannot protect them because Uncle Sugar has a vested interest that Europe stays a vassal. As simple as that. And so if the Russian maximalist goals are attained in a way or another, then Europe is going to start reacting the same way Russia reacted when NATO was coming closer, which is in a very paranoid sense. And given to the fact that there's a whole fringe of countries in Europe who are even more paranoid than the Russians, we are going to go towards something that never existed even during the Cold War. And that's why I hope for a good victory with enough situational awareness for the Russians to avoid a attempted Ukrainian attack in the future. But I really don't hope a maximalist goal like, in a sense, completely wiping out NATO and European influence out of Ukraine. Because as I said, this war is actually a huge armed negotiation. And for people who have seen Black Hawk Down, the movie, at the end, you got the pilot with a Somali militia leader, and the pilot says, "Yeah, but you kill people," and then the Somali says, "In my country, killing is negotiating," and it has always been like this. War is just politics by other means, you know the statement, and here it's just the same. The whole point is not to have the Russians be overly content to what happened. It would be worthy, honestly. It would be great. But as I said, the whole point is not to lose a decent peace by winning a hard-fought war. And once again, you know what happened. Russians, and Zhukov said it the best, we defeated fascism, but the Europeans are never going to forgive us for that. And it's the same thing. If Ukraine completely smashed, Russia wins a definitive victory, the same kind of principle is going to prevail on the European psyche. I know I sound a bit contradictory, but that's how it is. So this was for the space right now. I just wanted to explain two things. So first of all, there is a capacity shortage, both by design and also by circumstances on the European military industrial complex. And on the other side, the biggest situation is that short-term solutions for that, as were projected by some people, and even smart people, are actually counterproductive in the end, because you are sharing two cakes. The funds, you have only one cake, and you are supposed to get the most out of it for yourself. And then the supply, it's another cake. Those funds are going to be spread overall, but the supply is also going to start spreading overall. This means less funds for you for your own gearing up, and less supply for you for the long term, meaning that the prices are going to go up, both for your investment, for your rolling stock, and for your future purchase. So what can be a short-term solution, but very short-term, is going to be a long-term disaster, which means that you will have to go back and rebuild your own capability while having spent 6 to 8 months spending money around just to have a short-term gain. This is why the Russians are not doing. They're having their capability, and then for an extra oomph, they're going abroad. That's the way it should have been done. That's also how America did it when they tried to get everywhere they could in order to supply Ukraine, South Korea, Pakistan, Bulgaria, on top of what they had. And on that aspect, you can see that a unical system of control like the US or Russia, despite their dysfunctionalities, is a lot better than a multi-head, multi-pronged system with different opinions and also different views. Two smart guys can make a very bad decision. One dumb guy can make a lot of good decisions. Why? Because the dumb guy is on a 50-50. The two smart guys can completely block themselves. And in many cases, it happened also to me within Twitter when I had disputes with people I know are smart, but we're having a beef or a spat over something that we consider wrong on both sides, and we're not ready to give up our positions. And that's what I wanted to illustrate. You can be completely smart and judge that one thing is the contrary to what another smart, obviously smart people is thinking. That's what's happening with the Europeans. Some Europeans wanted to go abroad. Other Europeans said it makes no sense because we're going to lose. And they made the exact same logical approach that I had. The problem is that at the same time, they didn't have the capability to fulfill the task they set to themselves. But at least they didn't lose money. This is more important. There you go, guys. I'm going to be very quick with the Q&A if you want. I know that usually I say that, but it never happens like this. But today it has to be because I have a couple of things to do. So if everybody wants to intervene, up to you. You can ask questions about Avdiivka because as we are seeing, things are moving slowly, but they're moving onto the right direction. And also, as for Kherson, the statements from the Ukrainian side, the way they are labeled, vague and without actual denominations, mean that they are stalling also over there. So, yeah, up to you guys. Yes, General. Go on, man. Hi, man. Ah,
The problem is the industrialization of the Western countries. I mean, Russia and China, and at a certain point, if we take also our country as a model,
yep.
They had an industry. They controlled the extractive part of it, the
Exactly.
color metals. They didn't care about profit as long as the factories worked maybe 3 shifts, or I don't know how was working Polichani.
Yeah. Actually, at the end, it was really one shift, and it was like 12 hours. But you know how we used to work?
Yeah,
It was literally like your uncle or my uncle or your dad or my dad would go there early in the morning, would do nothing for 1 or 2 hours.
yeah,
Then the shift manager would come. You would start the torno, and then after like 8-9 hours of whatever was as on the plan, they would still go for 1 or 2 more hours because going back home to the wife was not always funny. I
yeah.
mean, but there was a one shift, 12 hours more or less. But I understand perfectly what you mean.
I mean, the supply is there, and on the Russian and on the Chinese side, and as long as they control the supply and the factories are not under pressure of making profits, like in Western Europe, as you explained well for the French and for the German, there's no pressure. Also, the American, as you said, it's private, but still, they control everything, and that's the point that it's going to win the thing. After all, I mean, Italy is not making anything anymore except the volcano guided thing and the 76, and they have no raw materials either. So yeah, it's a strange thing. I just wanted to ask: you think it's possible that they might try something on the Zaporizhia plant there with a river? Maybe the soil getting frozen or something this winter, like
On the Ukrainian side, you mean?
yeah.
I actually had a reply for a guy who took out his post. A NATO guy who took out his post, who was saying like whatever preparation is going on into the lower Kherson, the real target was North Kakova and the Kakova Reservoir. Problem with that is the following. The plain that has dried is rather large. The narrowest part is about 11 kilometers. Largest part is 21 kilometers. There is still a small creek going on, small creek or river, call it as you wish. It can be forded in some spaces, especially if it's freezing. The issue is that you still have to cover at least 11 kilometers. We saw how it happened with Botine, where the kill zone was only 8 kilometers. One, they cannot go there unseen. Two, they need to stage that whole area. And if you see, the only possibility would be to put troops around Nikopol. Putting troops around Nikopol is your worst part because you are at the longest length to cross, and it's also the deepest creek that you have there. That means that fording is not possible. You have to put pontoons. Those pontoons will have to really go when the ground is completely frozen. And then you will have the advance over there over about 15 to 20 kilometers. 50 to 20 kilometers, we saw that the Ukrainians cannot do unless the positions are completely unprepared. But given how the Russians are playing this game, and given where the Ukrainian positions are on that area, Ukrainian FPVs cannot help. And the Ukrainians, if they want to use artillery, would need to place it literally within the city of Nikopol. We saw that the Russians can hit that place pretty easily and also survey that place. We had the SSO raids back in the summer. We had multiple strikes all over Nikopol by Tornado, artillery, Lancet, and so on. So to me, if they want to try it, a lot of preconditions would have to be fulfilled, which is hiding a large staging group, so at least 2 to 3 brigades. We saw that was impossible in Orekov, where the situation for them was the best because they had 2 large cities around there. They could basically stage as much as they wanted. That's what they did initially when they sent a 50-60 vehicle column down that road, and then you know what happened. So, in my opinion, maybe if the Russian attrition, so that's one precondition, is bad enough, maybe if the Russians cannot react fast enough, but the problem is that now we know the blow that supposedly hit the Russians in Berdyansk and Lugansk, helicopter-wise, wasn't fatal because their choppers are still flying and they are still hitting shit. And on top of it, let's say that you're going to prepare 60 to 80 vehicles to cross over as a first fist. We saw that doesn't matter anymore with the FPV technology, and because you are so far, whatever you would like to do would mean that your electrical warfare will have to be on board of your tanks, your vehicles, whatever you want. But while you can stop FPVs, you will also have to be sure that you are stopping the ATGM crews, and we saw that also that was impossible for Ukrainians during the summer, despite the fact that they had 6 to 7 months to see everything. We had this guy, Tatarigami, I don't know if you saw one of his publications. We said that we surveyed everything for months, but we missed like half of their firing positions. And I'm like, bro, what the fuck? I mean, once again, we're going to this point where you don't understand how the hell it's possible that you have such a huge ISR complex behind you that allows you to strike targets with extreme accuracy, or maybe not 40 kilometers behind the line of contact, but you miss obvious firing points along, the tree belts. And this is my biggest problem, is that both sides need to solve a basic problem that they have, and that is they cannot stop individual small units. And they can pretend that they do this. The Russians have to concentrate a little bit of fire to take out 10 to 15 guys. Ukrainians need to concentrate fire to take out 10, 15 guys. But every time they need a repeated strike on those guys, and with the cluster ammunition that supposedly is a wonder weapon, we have seen that's not true unless you really, death ring the target. The issue, once again, is that if they want to do this, they need those preconditions. So the Russian attrition on assets and troops needs to be very bad. On that area, it's not. because they haven't tried anything around there, but UMPKs are still falling. They need a concentration of troops that would mean Russian ISR going down. I wouldn't bet on that because the Russian ISR is only going better and better, despite whatever is said about Ukrainian drones. The Russians are there, and I did the analysis during the next period of time. Russian and Ukrainian UAV losses, as described by Oryx, are almost the same, which means that the EV is working the same way. They are at the exact parity, which means that what the Ukrainians can do, the Russians can do. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. That's not a problem. But the level is the same when it comes to core, tactical, 20, 30, 40 kilometers ESR within the contact line or behind. This means that the only way that the Ukrainians are going to do this is something else happens elsewhere that the Russians cannot counter. The Kherson area chosen by them right now is their outer facility. They need to only cross 600 to 800 meters, and they go to marshes to which the Russians cannot go with heavier vehicles. First of all, because they're going to sink, but second of all, because the road going to Krinky, this was very well explained by a French Twitter member, is there's only one way going to Korsun, and that way has a arm or a shoulder, and it's completely visible. And so you have a whole defilade. So the Russians literally cannot get closer to Krinky with any kind of vehicles because they're going to get FPV'd, ATGM'd, whatever you want. So basically, Ukrainians are taking advantage that they are not using vehicles. They're going by small boats, infantry, and so on. And that's what I said. Taking out small teams of infantry in this war is being proven very complicated. Sometimes it's easy because they're in the open and ammunition lands exactly where it should, and everybody's 200, 300. But most of the time, the areas chosen for them to navigate have trenches, have small gaps, wadis, and so on. So you're forced to use assets that right now aren't 100% foolproof. And then the last point would be also, where are the troops to spare for such a maneuver? I have an idea, and I'm going to agree with you that it's very weird that 3 brigades that were supposed to also play a huge role are not there anymore. 82nd, after it got the shit beaten out of it, but actually lost only 1 Challenger 2 and a couple of auxiliary tanks that they added to not risk Challengers. It's still mostly intact with its tank company. Probably has a second one damaged, but that means that 12 Challengers are there. It can be supplemented by extra tanks. There are still some trash that can be sent. And plus, we have this Abrams brigade that, if the ground is frozen and useful, can be used. And then you can have this 50 tank force and about 200 EFV APC force that can be used to just try and do this push. However, the risk is, once again, you have to spread these guys wide enough, therefore reducing their actual impact. And on top of it, they really need to cross between, in the worst case scenario, 10, 11 kilometers. In best case scenario, for the Russians, of course, 20 kilometers before reaching the other side, not even the fighting positions. This means if something goes wrong, these guys cannot hide anywhere.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go.
Maybe they're waiting for the F-16 and the rest to do a combined arms Air Force operation.
That was exactly where I was going to go, and maybe actually, given whatever they were promised, if indeed it's going to be like a strike package starting very hard, trying to cover them by keeping the helicopters away, it's okay. The problem with that situation is then you need to keep the Russian Air Force away. And if we have to deal with the kinematics and so on, that is going to be a very difficult task. And if it fails, if that's the bet, but it fails, it's going to be a fucking beatdown, because the Abrams, the Challengers, all these vehicles are going to be too far gone to be sustained by a logistical chain. Once again, the TTP for an Abrams platoon company, battalion, or armored brigade combat team is 12 hours as a basic FARP, so basically fuel and resupply. But if this assault goes the way it's supposed to go for Ukraine in the beginning, but then the Jets needs to get the fuck out and the Russians come to play, then you're gonna have Abrams tanks locked on the other side of the river that you cannot pull back because those are fucking 60, 65 ton behemoths. Two, you're gonna have the Russians going at you with enough UMPKs to make your life miserable because they can launch them 70 kilometers behind. And on top of it, you're gonna have the Lancets, you're gonna have, I mean, the situation for me would require a famous strike package. So like 20 F-16s, 5 or 10 Su-24s, then again about 10 MiG-29s. So they're gonna have to put a sizable part of whatever they're gonna have as Air Force to be able to conclude this. If it works, perfect. Too bad for Russia, they didn't plan for it. If it fails, that's game over for that front.
Battle of the Bulge.
Exactly. If it fails, it's a done deal, and then the Russians are going to have PR material for ages, and you're going to see Zeks going on the Abram tanks like Houthis and having fun with lighters and mocking captured Ukrainians. So that's my biggest problem right here. That was my idea, and as you can see, Albanians think alike. But my scare is that if it doesn't work, so if this is not on the back head of the Ukrainian leadership, then there has to be a good reasoning, and maybe the Russians are not as well placed or well prepared on that area as we think. However, I would go for 80-20% chance of this working out. And given that the F-16s, for training purpose, 5 of them are only getting there now, unless they are ready within 4 or 5 weeks, plus new F-16s come by, and they, of course, lift off from Romania, which would be an act of war, but who the fuck counts right now, then maybe we are onto something. But then again, it's the staging points that make me a bit afraid on the Ukrainian side. Where are going to put these tanks? If you see the map, literally, the only strategic point when you can hide all this shit and then try and do a out maneuver is literally Nikopol. But that would mean that you would have also a force attacking on the line at Kamyanske and at Lobkove. And we've seen that is one of the best defended points on the Russian side. So I don't know if, I mean, you would have to put the resources that you put for the counter for the whole front of Zaporozhye in a very narrow front, about 20-30 kilometers.
I understand, but maybe, I mean, since it's coming close to being desperate for them, maybe they try this shit and they concentrate also the high Mars to keep the Russian counter battery away, or all their 52 caliber guns, what's left. So maybe they pull a crazy shit thing. That's
I literally agree with you. I said this is my only thought. But if Ukrainians are that crazy to do that, and they fail, once again, that's game over for the Southern Front for at least 6 to 8 months. And if it fails, the impact on the American psyche, because, okay, right now, okay, you saw some Bradleys destroyed, damaged, abandoned. Who the fuck cares? They have 4,000 or 5,000 Bradleys, 4,000 or 5,000 Abrams. But when you see a mass attack, a armored force supported by F-16s, supported by all kind of shit, by drones, and it's a narrower front, a better organized so-called attack with air cover, and it fails. And it fails in such a wonderful manner that it's not even that they fail to advance, but they fail to exploit, because this is the most important part with that area of the front. If they fail to exploit and so they get stuck on the other side of the Dnieper bank, and on top of it, the Russians react fast and smart so that they don't let the Ukrainians try to reestablish a refuel point or a control point in Elizavetovka or just next to Energodar. Then it's going to be psychologically before the Putin election and before the race for the presidential election in the US going to be terrible. Like, we are going to see the Republicans are going to have a field day, although it's not going to be nice for them to see destroyed Abrams and American vehicles getting pirated by the Russians, because that's also the one big problem. If you lose them on the other side of the riverbank, as I told you, to recover them, go and get them, is going to be 20 kilometers. In Orekov, it was easy. There was no divide, and it was 5 to 6 kilometers. So slow by slow, they pulled out everything that was burned. But in Nikopol area, you cannot do that. You're going to have to live with a fresh Abrams tank in Kubinka within 2 months. And you're going to have, as I said, if the Russians are asshole-ish enough, and they're going to be, you're going to have an Abrams tank in front of the American embassy in Moscow, and probably a inauguration visit from Putin to the Kubinka museum, Patriot Park, looking at Bradleys, looking at Abrams. So the impact here is not going to be not only military, but the PR side of it should dissuade for now the Ukrainians to do it. But as you said, they are desperate for something, and if this happens, I mean, it's going to be paradise. It's going to be paradise, because either it works for them and we are into something, and there's a huge risk for the Russians to have to pull a lot more strength there and put themselves in danger while they do this transfer against HIMARS, against aviation and so on. Or, to the contrary, it's such a huge disaster for the Ukrainian forces that you're going to have a domino effect on the whole leadership. Zaluzhny out, Syrsky out, Tarasenko is also already out, but also within the close circle of Zelensky himself, you're going to have the biggest situation here. You went for a Hail Mary in American football terms. It failed, it got intercepted, and the guys went for 7 on the other side, 6 actually, for a touchdown on the other side. You are finished politically. Ukrainians are not going to come out of this, despite that militarily, it will not change anything, actually. The line will stay the same. Ukrainians will still have the possibility to redo it once again. You know what I mean? It was the same thing that happened when the Russians went out of Kherson. It was a loss, but militarily, it helped them do what they did this summer. And this is where I'm coming from, that the biggest trouble for me, if this happens and it fails, it's not that much the military defeat, which, as I said, could be reshuffled, but it's the PR defeat. And politically, it would show that you're not in control anymore, because you're doing crazy things that do not work. And then we're going to go back to what the article was on Politico, when apparently Zelensky asked guys to attack Gorlovka. And the military looked at him like, bro, what the fuck? Like, lay down the coke or whatever, bro, because we don't have the man or the manpower to go to Gorlovka. And by the way, to finish with this, is actually worse for them to have the ongoing situation in Bakhmut, where the Russians are starting to go back to what they lost during the summer, than try that shit militarily, of course, lose it in Nikopol, and, try again. And once again, the most of it is like strategically, trying that thing in Nikopol is not that much of a problem if the blunder is not too big. If they lose like 5, 10, 12 tanks and a couple of Bradleys, it's okay. I mean, they did that in Robotine, didn't really change their approach. But if it's what we think they're going to try, like a whole Hail Mary, narrower front, a lot more artillery, air cover and everything, and it fails, to me, that would be the end of Zelensky as a military leader, because the Americans are going to come there and literally slap him across the board. That's it. If you have any other questions, if anyone wants to intervene, you're welcome, guys. By the way, I'm gonna reply to your question because you asked it by writing. We have no idea if any CAN 09 have been purchased or transferred. What we know is that there are something that resemble 122 North Korean millimeter rockets. They are said to have 30 kilometer range. They are also said to have a different propellant system. We also know about the Arash. The Russian Ministry of Defense showed them. And the Arash, the Iranian ones, are supposed to also be around 30 to 40 kilometers. And the biggest advantage, apparently, for the Iranians, I said it once again, is the insensitive propellant that they have. And it's very possible that Iranian loaded Grads have already been targeted, as we have seen in a couple of times where the propellant just burnt out but didn't cause maximal destruction. So on that part, we don't have any confirmation. What could be a confirmation is if they're used and the Ukrainians put their hands on them and show them, we're going to know almost immediately. That's what happened when the first attacks with the Shahids happened. That's what happened when the first attacks with any kind of new systems with Western or foreign input has been happening. So that was that part of the deal. Okay, guys, as I said, it's going to be a short question and answer here. If you want to intervene, it's now or never. One time, two time, three time. Okay, guys, thank you very much for this short interlude. I just wanted to point out why I think it short-sighted to point fingers on the European troika that decided how to spend the money over the ammunition. And it's also short-sighted to think that Europe's problems are fixable in the short term. There is a lack of common policy for that, and this is the source of the problems, on top of the fact that Europe is a subordinate player within the NATO alliance that is dominated by the US. That's it. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.